National Institute of Dramatic Arts had a tradition. Whenever final year students put on a performance, old alumni were invited to the audience. Then, at a post-production social event, aspiring actors, set designers, costume designers, prop designers, etc., could mingle with celebrities, both major and minor, to get an honest assessment of their efforts and make connections beneficial to their future careers. Thus, the actress communicated with the graduates. Her name doesn't matter and will be hidden. They communicated after the performance. She thought back to the nearly dozen years since her last year here and smiled. The past years had been exceptionally kind to her. Fame in the local industry quickly led to offers from Hollywood. Now she was treated well enough that she could choose her roles. Many wanted to meet her, but she believed in the purpose of her invitation here and sought out cast and crew members to talk and voice their opinions. A pretty girl in her early 20s introduced herself as Lisa, the set designer, and the actress praised her for her innovative use of space and clever interchangeability between sets. She was about to move on when the girl leaned slightly towards her. "My father wants to know if you will have dinner with him this evening." "Young lady, many people want to have dinner with me. Here is my agent's card. Contact him. He asked me to tell you that his name is Mr. Y." The actress froze. So after all these years, what she secretly feared happened. Crap. Wait a minute. The guy has an adult daughter. How bad can it be? Of course, he won't demand sex if his child is involved. On the one hand, she was always grateful to him. After all, it was he who suggested she become an actress. She had never thought about it until then. She was an economics student when she met him. After his proposal, she enrolled in IDOWorkHereLady and almost never looked back. On the other hand, she always considered this guy a threat. Why? He was a client only once, but once was enough. The actress thought about the contingency plans she had developed over the years. One whiff of her past, and she would be in full defense mode. She was strong enough to survive it, probably, but it was a battle she didn't want to fight. What's wrong with having dinner with this guy? Besides, ever since they met for the first and only time, she had been burning with curiosity to find out what it all was about. Yes, what was the harm? She asked the girl where and when it was proposed to meet the mysterious Mr. Y. It was a restaurant not far from the hotel where she lived. She talked for another hour and then went to the hotel, took a shower, and changed clothes. From the limo, she called first her lawyer, then her husband. Her husband demanded that she call back as soon as the 14-year-old mystery was solved. After walking 2 blocks to the restaurant, she was taken to a private room. Before entering, she put on a confident face to hide the nervousness she actually felt. If a guy is going to blackmail her into having sex, she will call his bluff. Her lawyer already knew the name of this guy's daughter. The door to the private room opened, and a wave of relief washed over the actress. Lisa was there, sitting next to another girl who looked a year or so younger. The actress's gaze moved to a man of about 40, whom she re-recognized from a single meeting 14 years ago, Mr. Y. There was a lady at the table about the same age as the man. Mr. Y stood up and shook her hand, introducing himself as Thomas Green, before introducing his wife and daughters. After they ate, and the ladies asked the obligatory celebrity questions, Thomas called for silence. He announced that now that his youngest daughter, Jenny, was 18, he had a story to tell. This was only his part of the story, and he was very glad that the actress agreed to join them to confirm some of the details. The actress looked at the 2 girls and noticed the expectant looks on their faces. Then she noticed that she herself was sitting on the edge of the chair, smiling. She forced herself to relax. Thomas was clearly nervous. Only Sandra, his wife, looked relaxed. She held her husband's hand tightly, squeezing it. He turned towards her, then forward again, before continuing his speech. Thomas explained his motive for telling his strange story, partly to fulfill his promise to the actress. He nodded in her direction at that moment, and calmed her thoughts about the strange events of a decade and a half ago, and that there was something that could harm her image. She nodded gratefully to Thomas. Second, he had to tell his daughters for the first time why they had not seen their biological mother in over 14 years. He explained that he had intended to tell Lisa about this when she turned 18, but she had never asked. It was a compliment to Sandra, he said. Apparently, she was the only mother his daughters needed. After this explanation, he warned them that by telling them this story, he was going to ask them for forgiveness for his unilateral actions committed so long ago. Thomas started from the beginning. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, a woman lay awake in a cheap motel bed, listening to the snoring of a man who looked like a pig, analyzing the mistakes she had made that led to her current situation. I don't think I was born for this life. Moreover, I think that the easy course of my life has given me a sense of a certain right to indulge my desires. Born into a prosperous middle-class family, she grew up without needing anything. Almost effortlessly, I graduated from university with an arts degree and a diploma in education. Dad used his connections to get me my first job at a good school, instead of me having to work my way out of the usual holes. I worked for 5 years, never settling on one hobby, one pastime, or one man. In short, I loved trying everything life had to offer. I dipped my toe into any pond I liked. Then, when I was almost 28, my dad begged me to settle down and do something with my life. By this point, he was the chief assistant to a federal senator and knew deep down that he himself would never reach the top. Perhaps he wanted to achieve through me what he could not achieve on his own, or perhaps he saw in me what I did not see in myself. Despite this, he hooked me with stories of the power his boss wielded. The two of us developed a plan according to which I would become the first female prime minister of our country within the next 20 years. The list included a successful career, a family, joining a political party, becoming more involved with the mainline church and charitable work, to name a few. With my newfound ambition, everything seemed easy again. I met my future husband through a church committee, but not in the way you think. I was in a side room of the church and asked a worker to redo some antique woodwork to reduce the noise. He was kneeling with his back to me when I shouted to get his attention. He turned, his tall body turned and smiled. A whiff of his musky scent hit my nostrils and appealed directly to my femininity. We got married less than a year later. Yes, he was only a cabinet maker, but it was a good, honest trade, and added enough to my salary that we could afford a nice house in the best part of town. Joining the local Liberal Party introduced me to several board members of an exclusive girls' school. With their help, I received the position of deputy director, then director, a position I held for 2 years when I made the worst decision of my life. This position was achieved despite the fact that I took 2 large 12-month leaves for the birth of my daughters. Lisa was born in 1998 and Jenny 2 years later. I wanted to return to work and a busy committee and fundraising schedule 3 months after each birth, but my dad told me to wait a year. The public, he told me, would judge me as a mother above almost everything else. So, at the time this story really began, Lisa was 6 years old and Jenny was 4. A good house was exchanged for an even better one. I had a good career as a headmistress and headed several charities. I swear the local church wouldn't have run without me. But best of all, I was the favorite to top our party's ticket in the next state election in 2 years. Life was wonderfully hectic, if a little tiring at times. 3 or 4 committee meetings every week, fundraising, visiting church dignitaries all this time. I was expected to look good and keep my smile ready for any cameras. But I couldn't have done it all without Thomas. Being self-employed, he could start working as early as he wanted to get home in time to pick up the girls from school and daycare. He then looked after them while I was away in the evenings. To be fair, he spent most of his weekends taking care of the kids too. Usually I would be busy elsewhere or relaxing before starting over on Monday. As a New Year's resolution, the year my marriage ended, I vowed to devote more time to Thomas and the girls. But after being absent for most of their lives, I felt a bit like an outsider. Then another pressure forced me to leave them again. In addition to all my other responsibilities, I also had to maintain my professional teaching accreditation. This meant attending 2 conferences a year, the second of which in that particular year, I forgot to tell Thomas until the last minute. How was I to know that he had arranged for a babysitter for the entire weekend, planning a romantic weekend so we could get closer again? He was disappointed to say the least when I told him I had other plans, but I knew he would get through it. He always did. The conference meant that I would be away on Friday and Saturday nights, so I promised him that we would have our own party on Sunday night. He didn't seem impressed and barely spoke to me until I left. I vowed to myself to be more understanding in the future. Divorce at this point would be close to disaster. Oddly enough, Thomas didn't call on Friday night. I chalked it up to the fact that he was still irritated. When he called me on Saturday, I thought he had stopped sulking. It was already late, well after dinner, when the phone rang in the room. Immediately after the call, I thought that I was in a difficult but not hopeless situation. I now know that my fate was sealed at that moment, except for one future decision. The conversation started normally enough, with each of us asking how the other's day had been. I was busy with something, and as I said, it was already late, so I tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. Maybe the wine I drank for dinner didn't help my case. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I am not drunk at all. I'm pretty sure the last few lines are due to this. It's time for me to go, Thomas dear. The first seminar will begin tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning. Fine. Tell the girls you miss them. Certainly. Kiss them for me. We'll be done. Say hi to Alan for me. Okay, I'll tell you what. A beep followed. Oh, I forgot to tell you about Alan, didn't I? Well, not to put too much stock in it, Alan has been my lover for almost a year now. It wasn't a conscious decision to have a lover, but looking back, I had everything I wanted, so why not? Alan worked for a public relations company that the party hired to support me. We worked closely together. He organized all my meetings with the media and was mainly responsible for my public persona. One weekend, when I was high from a big sponsorship deal for a charity, we became lovers. I celebrated with too much wine, and we just went to bed and went for it. The next day, I was terrified of what the consequences would be if I got caught, the end of my political aspirations. I was on guard for the next few days for fear of a leak, but nothing was said. I relaxed. The trouble is that it didn't end there. Alan was young, attractive, and, energetic in bed. The mischief and a little risk made it very exciting, and to tell you the truth, I don't think the thought of ending this relationship ever seriously crossed my mind. The sex was still alive after a year, perhaps because we only met a couple of times a month. I've worked hard for years and deserve some luxury. The fact that Thomas worked just as hard, if not harder on the family side, never crossed my mind. I may not have been born with a sense of entitlement, but I'm sure I've developed it. That evening, Alan sat naked on my bed and listened to me talk to Thomas. He saw how my face fell and my jaw dropped. We quickly decided that this was the worst crisis ever. Alan stopped me as I wondered out loud how we got caught. I'm not stupid, and I've always been incredibly careful. I even had a checklist that I mentally filled out before every date. Meetings had to take place outside of our city. A disguise had to be worn, and Thomas' whereabouts had to be known. When traveling, separate rooms with connecting doors were always used. One thing was certain. When I returned to my husband, not a single smell, taste, or anything physical from Alan was brought home by me. I knew that if Thomas ever suspected I had an affair, Alan would be a prime candidate. So whenever we were together, we were incredibly careful, except for that very weekend. Since the trip wasn't strictly political, Alan wasn't required to accompany me. But given that Thomas was supposed to be at Lisa's soccer final all weekend, I figured there was zero chance of him showing up. As long as I was careful when bringing Alan in and out of my room, it was safe. At least, that's what I thought. That's why Thomas' casual words and my unintentional confession, either due to the wine or because Alan kept me awake the night before, shook me to the core. It took me a while to remember that I had a contingency plan. Despite the late hour, I called my dad, and he called his lawyer. Now I know that I probably should have done things differently. I suspect that if I had gone straight home, told Thomas that my affair was over, and thrown myself at his mercy, he might have forgiven me. He was incredibly family-oriented after all. It was just one novel. I will never know whether the extremely brutal attack Thomas launched on me shortly after was inevitable from that point on, or whether it was my reaction to being caught that caused it all. Dad was horrified by what I had done, and pointed out that I had given Thomas the opportunity to destroy all my hard work. He said he would make sure I got on the next flight home and told me to pack my things and get my ass to the airport. Alan's reaction to the whole episode was surprising, although perhaps it shouldn't have been surprising. I suppose to enhance the experience for myself, I pretended to have deep feelings for him. His reaction definitely proved that he loved me. It was a pitiful sight to see him begging me to leave my husband and marry him. It got me thinking, but not for long. I didn't love him. I loved Thomas. Yes, I loved him very much. Yes, it was very flattering to be with a younger man. And yes, it was very inspiring to have a lover, albeit a secret one. But leaving my husband for him, it will not happen. Besides, Having a partner 10 years younger than me who caused me to leave my husband and destroy my family would make me a laughingstock and ruin any chance of saving my career. However, I felt bad for letting him fall so hard for me, so I threw him a bone. He left for the next week, so I promised to visit him when he returned after the situation in my house had stabilized. Just because my husband apparently found out that I have a lover, well, that doesn't mean I have to stop, does it? Only if my husband insists and threatens to use this knowledge as a weapon, I suppose. I won't bore you with the details, but my father, his lawyer, my sister and I arrived at my family's house just as Thomas and the girls were leaving the house on Sunday morning to go to the zoo. We made Thomas go back into the house while my sister took the girls. I was tired, and we hadn't rehearsed, so I left the conversation to Dad and the lawyer. At first, Dad didn't like my choice of a simple merchant as a partner, but Thomas was so nice that Dad soon overcame his doubts. They got along great over the years, even becoming friends of sorts. However, given the choice between this friendship and supporting me, Dad did not hesitate to choose a side. I have to say I was a little sorry that Thomas was attacked like that. Dad began the argument with a review of expectations. He suggested that Thomas obviously expected me to be faithful, and perhaps this was an unreasonable expectation given the differences in our social classes, earning abilities, and achievements. I was a little horrified by this approach. The devastation I had caused my husband was clear, and it hurt me. I tried to meet Thomas' gaze to convey this, but he just stared in shock at the table in front of him. And what kind of attack it was. I'm glad it wasn't me who was attacked. There were threats of gag orders, writs of injunction, and lawsuits for lies and defamation. Thomas showed no emotion. Same thing when my father asked what evidence he had of my infidelity. He practically admitted that he didn't have any. In fact, it turned out that he wasn't even sure I was having an affair until I accidentally admitted it myself on Saturday night. When I put everything together much later, I believed that all my precautions were in vain. Thomas's friend overheard Alan bragging about sleeping with me and warned Thomas. Not quite believing it, Thomas threw out his "say hi to Alan for me" statement to see what would shake from the trees. The realization of the shock he must have felt when I responded like that shook my conscience to the core. However, Dad did not have such a conscience. After asking the lawyer to leave the room, he hinted that to save my reputation, evidence of Thomas' infidelity might have to be fabricated. Thomas showed no emotional reaction to this. In fact, I thought he was completely withdrawn emotionally until the lawyer came back and went on about how the mother always gets custody, and typically the father only gets access to the kids every other weekend. I saw his face freeze, but I turned away when his gaze focused on me. I couldn't stand it. There was no way he deserved this. He loved girls. He doted on them and spent every free hour raising them. That's why I could afford to be away from the family home so often. The attack ended with Dad telling Thomas that the girls and I would stay with him for a few days so that he, Thomas, would get an idea of how lonely life would be if he didn't toe the line. We'll be back Tuesday night so I can get ready for our annual masquerade. Dad assumed that by then Thomas would pretend everything was normal and not ruin such a huge event that was supposed to showcase our happy family. As a parting shot, Dad promised Thomas that he would support me financially, while making sure his lawyers limited Thomas's access to quality legal advice. Whatever happened to my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my dad was gone forever. When I left, Thomas looked completely devastated. If it didn't bother my conscience so much, I could be happy. I hugged him from behind in the chair and whispered, "Everything will be fine, dear," but did not receive any reaction. Away from the prying ears of his lawyer, Dad pulled me away from my novel. I think he was letting off some steam because of what he had just done to a man he always respected. He warned me that if Thomas ever found any evidence of impropriety on my part, it would be game over. I assured him that I was too smart for that. When the girls and I returned to the family home on Tuesday evening, it was a warm welcome for the girls, but a frosty welcome for me. I knew it would be an awkward homecoming, and I really thought about postponing it, but two factors forced my hand. First of all, the next day Dad was leaving for his annual fishing trip. Every year, he and 3 friends would rent a shack and go completely off the grid for a week. Secondly, the house needed to be prepared for the party on Saturday night. Thomas barely noticed my presence. After the girls went to their beds, I apologized for my affair. Thomas simply stood up and headed to the guest room on the first floor where he was apparently sleeping. Through the closed and locked door, I calmed down. I fully intended to dump Alan immediately, but after several phone calls from him in the previous 2 days, I realized that with his emotional attachment to me, he also posed something of a threat to my career. He, unlike Thomas, didn't have to prove anything. Simply blaming him would be damaging. So I decided to continue seeing him in the short term, but end it as soon as I could guarantee safety. Continuing to sleep with him and act like us so he wouldn't enjoy my company seemed like the best course of action. I tried to explain this to Thomas through the locked door, as well as my intention to be late home next Monday due to the need to see Alan. But without an answer and without any hints, I have no idea how successful I was. However, I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to get the house ready for a party. Ever since we moved into our mini mansion 8 years ago, we've been throwing a masquerade party. It was held without any special day and was designed solely to impress influential people in the community. It also demonstrated what a happy, healthy family I have. Dad was never present because he didn't want me to be seen in his shadow. I was happy and proud that on the advice of some professionals, this event turned into one of the must-attend events on the social calendar. There was a DJ and a dance floor. The house was decorated, and the drinks were flowing. The guest list was carefully thought out. Each participant could help my career in some way. This was such an important event that ensuring Thomas's full participation and cooperation was my top priority over the next few days. In short, I received his reluctant acknowledgement that he would attend and participate. What a relief it was. However, the interaction stopped there. The rest of the time, he paid almost no attention to me. However, I couldn't dwell too much on it. Without Thomas' help, organizing the party was a full-time job. I guess by Saturday evening, I was exhausted from being in crisis mode for a full week. That's why I drank too much. I had 2 glasses of wine to relax before Alan arrived. Of course, he had to be there. After all, he controlled my public relations. It was hard work keeping him and Thomas apart, or so I thought. My memories of greeting all the guests at the front door are clear. As a hostess, I wanted to stand out. Of course, it was a masquerade ball, but no one should have any doubt about who the hostess was. Most of my school board members, the local bishop, local politicians, and influential party members were present. There were even 2 judges. When all the guests were comfortable, the food began to be served. I remember how we mingled as we all lined up to get our portions of the professionally spit-roasted pig. I rarely relaxed at such meetings. They were too important. The situation was especially tense due to the need to keep Thomas and Alan apart. The tension finally broke when Thomas offered me a glass of punch about 2.5 hours later. His whisper about adding some vodka to relax me warmed my heart. I took it as an olive branch, accepted it, and drank it. The latter, however, is reluctant. I had already exceeded my self-imposed modest drinking limit, but I was so pleased with Thomas' gesture that I drank immediately. Soon after, everything became a blur, and my next memory was waking up in my bed the next day with a terrible hangover. As soon as I was able to stand up, my head pounding, I found Thomas and tried to reassure him that I had not embarrassed myself. He told me that I was talking about an hour before the party ended, and then he saw me sleeping on our bed. Everyone was cheerful and too busy to notice my absence, according to him. I didn't do anything out of the ordinary. Relaxed by the news, I tried to find my cell phone to chat a little and apologize for missing church. It was nowhere to be found, and we had long ago given up our landline. To stop the pounding pain in my head, I stayed in bed for the rest of the day and dozed. Because I slept so much, by 5 a.m. the next morning, I had sparkling eyes and a bushy tail. I stood up, desperate for coffee. The light was on in the kitchen, and Thomas was sitting at the table. He didn't move when I walked in and kissed the top of his head. Below is what I remember from our conversation since then. He has never spoken to me face to face. "What are you doing so early?" He just looked at me a little incredulously. Ever since I realized that the woman I loved with all my heart and who I thought loved me had stabbed me in the back, I've barely slept a wink. Looking back, I realized that I probably should have responded to this statement in a conciliatory manner. Instead, I snapped. I think it was the accumulation of days and nights of guilt, on top of being angry about not having any memories of the party and wasting a day in bed. "Aren't you the one who always says that if you can't do something about a problem, don't worry?" Dad explained how the future would develop. Accept it and move on with your life." Thomas sat in the chair completely motionless. His next words sounded like a hiss. His eyes sparkled and bored me. "What, embrace the life of a cuckold?" He fell silent, clearly trying to maintain control. I thought I'd calm him down a little. "Just for a moment, dear. It will all be over before you know it." This reminded me that I would be returning home late in the evening. "I'm dating Alan." Thomas jumped to his feet so quickly that his chair tipped back and hit the floor with a loud thud. In the split second that followed, the silence seemed calmer by contrast. Thomas stood with his arms crossed over his chest, and before my eyes, he began to clench and unclench his fists. Each movement made a rustling sound as his fists moved against the fabric of his trousers. If I hadn't been so confident in my dad's precautions, I might have been sincerely worried. Thomas went beyond hissing and practically spat. "Do you really think that I would agree to the life of a human humiliated person? A man without pride and without choice? And you? I know your father lives his life by the motto Auarquus testiculus habes, habes cardia et cerebellum. If you have someone by the balls, their hearts and minds will soon follow you. But that's not me. I will never be like that, now or ever." With these words, he took off for his morning jog. I sat and thought about what he said. Was there some angle I missed? Did he have a choice but to move with the times? I didn't think so. I shrugged and began seriously looking for my phone. Eventually, I found it dead, so I put it on charge. I made Lisa's school lunch as a sign of reconciliation with Thomas, and then got ready for work. The kids woke up before he got home, so we didn't have a chance to talk again. I left. If I had known what would happen that day, and all the days after, I would have at least hugged the children. Thomas, if the end result had not been the destruction of my marriage and serious problems in your lives, this Monday would have been very satisfying. You heard what your mother did to me, and it is very important that you understand what I did next and why I did it. Ironically, it was Martha's father and lawyer who pushed me to make the decision. They told me so well which alleys they had blocked that I didn't even think about escaping. They thought they had left me one acceptable path, but it wasn't for me. Being mostly law-abiding, they did not even consider the possibility of the path I chose. So what did you do, Dad? I'll get to that. I will describe the phone calls I received from your birth mother that day. The first one was a little after 9 a.m. "James, it's me. The boss of Alan's company just called me. He told me that because of what I did to Alan at the party on Saturday, his company would no longer represent me. If this gets out, it could hurt my chances of being pre-selected. What happened? What did I allegedly do to Alan?" They didn't tell me. There's nothing suspicious about it, my dear. You need him on his manhood below the waist in front of about 30 witnesses. I have it all on security tape if you want to look. I didn't do this. Sorry, honey, I have to go. Then at 10:23 a.m. James, are you listening? James, what are you not telling me? The bishop's secretary just called. I have been asked to resign from all church committees that I am on. I mean, not just resign from the chairmanship, but quit committees altogether. They didn't say why. What happened on Saturday night? What did I do after I drank too much? I believe the bishop told his people to get you away from his church as quickly as possible because he caught you and that guy in our downstairs bathroom. You understand what? Why? Sorry, honey. I have to go. Then, at 10:42 a.m., oh, James, I just checked my messages on my phone. Half of my friends called me to tell me what I was and to ask how I could do this to you. What should I do, James? What are they talking about? I'm not sure, dear. Maybe they're talking about you dancing dirty, or better yet, practically having sex with that guy on the dance floor. They were a little embarrassed for me when they saw this. Or maybe it's because when they asked me why I didn't stop you, I told them that you demanded the right to cheat on me with other men and threatened to break me and our family if I publicly objected. Did you say that? I certainly did. You and your father thought you left me with only one choice, to go along with your sick and dirty little plan. I found another viable option, and all it cost me was a little public humiliation. Okay, there will be a lot of humiliation after tomorrow's paper comes out. But James, when I asked you on Sunday if I behaved well during the time I didn't remember, you said yes. I think you heard what you wanted to hear, dear. What I actually said was that you didn't do anything out of the ordinary, and I'll stick to that. I'm convinced that all behave this way. I I don't know how I could lose control like that. Can you call the bishop and other people to tell them that it wasn't really me, that I lose control if I drink too much? Why would I do this for you, darling? Because you are my husband, and husbands fight for their wives. Like how you went to beat me when your father and his lawyer described how they would disembowel me if I didn't let you sleep with other men. Listen, James, you know it wasn't like that. I made a mistake and acted as quickly as I could to avoid the consequences. I had only slept with Alan and was planning on doing it 1 or 2 more times. The most is 3. Listen, James, can you come home sometime so we can talk? I just need to stay another hour. The head of the student council is coming to talk to me. Yes, and I know what she wants to talk about. She and most of the board were there on Saturday night, remember? I don't like your chances. She went through that messy divorce a couple of years ago, didn't she? When did she catch her husband cheating? Besides, I'm home. I just finished an interview with a local newspaper and television network. I even gave them the CCTV footage. Now, if there's nothing else, honey, I need to think a little about whether there is some aspect of your life that I haven't completely destroyed yet. After that, there was only silence on the line. I went to work and then picked you girls up. When we got home, it was obvious that your mother had returned, packed some clothes, and left in a hurry. She even left the front door open. She was hiding a couple of states away with her sister. She was too embarrassed to appear in public for several months. By the time she resurfaced, the judge had ruled that she had left the family home, and I was granted custody. Didn't her father do anything to help her? No, there's nothing to talk about. When he showed up again after fishing, he did call to threaten me, but only once. Reading between the lines, I understand that his boss told him to either distance himself from his own child or resign. He eventually resigned. Whether he couldn't afford lawyers or they advised him it was a lost cause, I'll never know, but we never heard from his legal team again. I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but he was still begging me to let him see his granddaughters when he died of a heart attack about a year after it all happened. Your biological mother begged me several times to bring you girls to where she was hiding, but by then I had met Linda, the only mother you remember, and I didn't want to confuse you. I heard that after that she fell into some bad company and I kind of lost track of her. I could try to find her contact information if you want to find her. Neither of them seemed too interested in the proposal. And that's why, girls, you shouldn't drink. All eyes turned to the actress. Girls, considering what your father just told us, I think I know what happened and why he invited me here today. You see, one day he promised to tell me the whole story. To be honest, I'm surprised the paparazzi haven't discovered this yet. Before I continue, please promise not to repeat a word of what I say. After waiting for affirmative nods from everyone present, she continued, I never even thought about becoming an actress until your father suggested it. Like many orphans, I really struggled financially in college. I took on a high-class escort job. My friend got me into it. Before you turn your nose up at me, I mean escort in the old-fashioned sense. All I did was accompany the guys. It could be a corporate dinner or just some lonely businessman in town for the day looking for some companionship. I'm sure some girls went beyond that for a price, but the agency I worked for never encouraged it. In any case, this was not necessary. With my looks and I was told my bubbly personality, I was well in demand as a companion. Anyway, one day my representative arranged a meeting between me and a guy who introduced himself as Mr. J, your father. We met once and he said that I would approach him. I always wanted to know why he chose me. She looked at James expectantly. Because I looked through all the escort sites until I found someone who could pass for my ex-wife at a masquerade ball. It's clear. Well, I was going to say no, but because of the amount your father was offering, I ended up taking the risk. I wouldn't, but your dad said I could take my boyfriend to the masquerade too. The actress paused to take a sip of her drink, checking the situation for threats to her career. Your father told me to come at 9 p.m., and when he called, Ken and I got out of our car to the back gate where your father let us in. He handed me a dress and a mask. Sorry to interrupt, but I want everyone to know the whole story. The party was in full swing and almost everyone was very happy. It probably helped that I added 2 bottles of vodka to the punch bowl. It was funny to watch how she tries to act like a good housewife, but always stands between me and her boyfriend. I saw her drinking constantly and timed it well to give her the medicine. I crushed 3 sleeping pills and threw them into the glass. I even told her about the vodka. It took her about 10 minutes, but when I saw her stumbling, I carefully led her to our bedroom. A few minutes later, she was fast asleep, so I took off her dress and mask. The finishing touch was to use the same perfume she always wore. The actress nodded, then continued her story again. The dress wasn't perfect, but no one seemed to notice. I applied some perfume and a mask. I expected to be taken to the party on the arm of your father and for Ken to have fun, but it turned out to be much stranger. Your father told Ken and I to have fun, pretend we were a couple, but not talk to anyone. The last one was a little difficult, but we decided to go to the dance floor to discourage conversation. Suffice it to say, Ken and I danced very close, and he had his hands all over my ass. I kept looking around and most people looked at us very awkwardly, and then looked at your father. He didn't seem to pay any attention to us. There was one guy who kept trying to interfere in Ken's affairs, but your father warned us not to let him. After about 5 dances, I went to the toilet, and Ken, the horny idiot, followed me. After I finished my business, he lifted me up so that I was sitting on the dressing table, then kissed me and lifted my dress. I'm sure he was going to go much further, but at that moment, a man burst into the room, clearly desperate for the toilet. He blushed when he saw us and ran away. He was a big guy with a red beard, wasn't he? Seems to be, yes. Bishop Carling. Oh my God. Well, this event even interrupted Ken and I in the bathroom. We started to head back to the dance floor, but my horny idiot overcame his, restraint and dragged me into the shade of the trees. We started kissing, and he lifted the back of my dress when the spotlight came on, and everything went quiet. We turned around and saw that everyone was looking at us. What could we do? We just got back on the dance floor. The guy whose photograph we saw tried to intervene, continued to call me darling and sweetheart, even after I told him to off. About then, I looked back and saw a group of people surrounding your father. They didn't look happy. Something of an accusation, actually. She stopped to look at James, raising her eyebrows. Well, first the bishop came up, then the head of her school council, and asked what was the matter with my wife. I want you girls to know I didn't lie. I spoke the absolute truth when I said that she demands the right to do whatever she pleases with other men. I then explained how I found out about her latest affair, and how she and her father threatened me with complete ruin, even fabricating evidence against me if I made a fuss. He smiled at the memory. From the sincerity in my voice, they realized that I was telling the absolute truth. It makes sense. At some point, all the people gathered around your father turned and stared daggers at me. It was really awkward. Yes, I regret that there was so much outrage at that moment that it could have led to a small war. I don't know if the bishop was going to say anything about what he saw in the restroom until you were picked up by the security spotlight. I turned on, but it definitely went off after that. No one could believe that my prim, lively wife could behave like that. I think every wife, and even a few husbands, hugged me within the next few minutes. It all ended when the next cabaret on the dance floor happened. Do you have to tell them about this? I'm not particularly proud of it. Then tell me. The actress paused to remember the correct sequence of events that happened many years ago. Well, Ken and I were just minding our own business on the dance floor. People started coming up and whispering to other people. Pretty soon, the number of dancers was cut in half, and even more people were looking at me and Ken. Then that little idiot your dad showed us in the photo came up, grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away. I've had enough. I turned and kneed him right in, you know where. It was fun. He did what they do in the movies, you know? His eyes crossed and he started getting down on his knees. He must have been trying not to fall because he reached out to grab me. Ken has always been a defender. I soon married him, you know. He grabbed the guy by the hand, turned him around and punched him. It knocked him off his feet and onto his ass. The guy just sat there with one hand on his face and the other on, lower areas. Everyone started clapping. It was quite strange. I'm guessing it was your ex-lover. Yes, his name was Alan. I may have told people that he was her lover, and that's why he kept trying to interfere. What happened to him? Well, the party pretty much fell apart after that. Almost everyone came up to me and asked if there was anything they could do. One of the judges even suggested that I ask my lawyer to look up the definition of mental cruelty. I just told them to do what they thought was right. Alan was one of the last to leave. I caught him as he limped away and, well, relieved my anger and frustration on him a little before he left. Later, I hear that his company found out the whole story and calmly fired him. He had been with them since he left school, and they refused to give him a recommendation. He had moved and was working at McDonald's when I last heard from him. After that, I lost interest. Sarah turned to the actress. Have you seen any of this? I hung around until the end but didn't see this dirty man again. Your father showed up again and gave me the rest of the money he owed me. I did ask him what the whole evening was about, but he was obviously upset by the scene and simply said that he would tell me someday. Ken and I turned to leave, but your father smiled at us through his tears and suggested that I had missed my calling and should become an actress. Believe it or not, it got me thinking, and 2 weeks later I applied to NIDA. Acceptance soon followed. Money speaks for itself, as they say. Now I need to go and call Ken. He's back in Los Angeles. He asked me to tell him the story as soon as I knew it. He said he would wait all night if he had to. The actress stood up to say goodbye. Goodbye, Sarah. I will follow your career with interest. If you need help at any time, please call me. Jenny, if you decide to follow your sister and problems arise, don't hesitate to ask for help. They owe me about a dozen services at AITA. Linda, look after your husband and these two scoundrels. They are special, all of them. Wiping tears from her eyes, she turned to the girls. From what your father said, he had your best interests at heart and did what he had to do when the odds were against him. When he asks you for forgiveness, I suggest you give it unconditionally. She was too depressed to speak when she turned to face James, so she simply hugged him and then ran away before she lost her composure. Following her, the girls exchanged glances. Then Jenny nodded to Sarah, who turned to her father. No need to ask, Dad. We forgive you. We barely remember our biological mom. You were always a father and mother to us when we lived there. Then Linda appeared and taught us what a mother should be. They all stood up for a group hug. James, who never hid his emotions from those he loved, cried unabashedly. Thanks, girls. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing, but you can never be sure, can you? I don't know why I doubted myself. Just look at you both. Beautiful, confident, healthy, and wise. I must have done something right. Now everyone was crying. All three women told James that he was an exemplary father. The waiter coughed behind them, holding a large dessert of cream caramel. James looked at Linda, who returned the same look, shaking her head silently, denying that she had ordered it. Having placed it on the table, the waiter handed James a note. It simply read, hard shell, but soft sweet center. James passed the note to Linda, who laughed her sweet laugh. Looks like she didn't fall for your tough guy stick either. 3 time zones away, Martha lay awake, desperately trying not to wake the fat slob next to her. When her meager divorce settlement ran out, she tried to get a teaching job without references in her new state. After a 3-month course in bridge building, she was allowed to practice, but was only offered places in small schools in bush cities. They paid the bills, but she was desperate to return to her city. Since the public school system was not an option, she resorted to desperate measures to get into a good private place. The guy lying next to her was the head of the board of an exclusive girls' school, and if she didn't wake him up, then hopefully he wouldn't have time to bother her again before he had to leave. Just this thought made Martha's mouth almost go dry. Sticking to the plan was sometimes difficult. This plan was to get a job she could be proud of, so she could finally track down her daughters and be a part of their lives. It took almost a decade and a half, but she finally realized what was most important. She carefully rolled over onto her side, her quiet tears soaking the pillow.